Am I the bad guy for not siding with my wife over our son's ex-girlfriend's pregnancy? I never imagined I'd find myself in such a tangled web of teenage drama. But here I am, trying to navigate the storm that has engulfed my family. It all started when my son, who had just turned 16, broke up with his girlfriend. A month later, we received shocking news. She was pregnant. The timing lined up perfectly with their relationship, and my wife and I were thrown into a panic. After a few days of deliberation, we decided it was time to tell our son. When we broke the news, his reaction was immediate and vehement. "It's not mine." I admit, I had my doubts. I knew my son was active in his relationships, but he insisted they had never gone that far. He even asked me for protection, which made me question everything I thought I knew. In the midst of our family turmoil, my son revealed that he had cheated on her, but maintained that they had only engaged in certain acts that couldn't result in a pregnancy. I was torn. He was being honest about his actions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still hiding something. My wife, however, was convinced he was the father and began discussing solutions with the girlfriend's family. During a tense meeting with both families, my son reiterated that he was not the father. He was visibly upset, and I could see the anger boiling inside him. His ex-girlfriend backed him up, stating that their physical interactions had been limited. I found myself caught in the middle, trying to support my son, while my wife accused me of siding with him and perpetuating a boy culture. She was worried about the implications of teenage parenthood, especially since we had been young parents ourselves. As the days went by, the tension only escalated. The girlfriend's parents refused to consider a paternity test until after the baby was born, citing concerns for the child's health. This left us in a frustrating limbo, and my wife felt increasingly isolated in her efforts to prepare for the worst. A week later, I found myself back in the thick of it. My son's ex-girlfriend had sent messages to a friend that contradicted his claims, and my wife was eager to confront him with this new evidence. Without my knowledge, she invited the girlfriend's family over for another meeting. What transpired was nothing short of chaotic. My son was quiet at first, but as the conversation progressed, he admitted to certain details that made me cringe. He even made a comment about his physical attributes that I never wanted to hear. The atmosphere grew tense, and my son's defiance escalated. He began making inappropriate jokes and comments that left everyone speechless. When my wife pressed him to stop denying the truth, he pushed back, asserting that he wouldn't agree to a paternity test until he finished college, which could be 6 years away. He was adamant that he wouldn't be forced into anything, and his confidence in his stance was unnerving. The meeting ended with him storming out, and I found myself caught between my wife's frustration and my son's rebellion. In the car ride that followed, my son expressed his feelings about the situation. He was struggling with the social fallout at school and the pressure from home. He referred to my wife in a derogatory way, which was hard to hear. I reminded him that he needed to respect her, but he was too caught up in his anger to listen. As I drove him to his friend's house, I realized that our family dynamics had shifted dramatically. The relationship between my wife and son was strained, and I felt the weight of the conflict pressing down on me. I was left wondering how we would ever find a resolution to this complicated situation. Navigating the complexities of teenage relationships, unexpected pregnancies, and family loyalty is no easy task. As we face the uncertainty ahead, I can only hope that we find a way to heal and come together as a family, despite the challenges that lie ahead. I never imagined I would find myself in such a complicated situation, but here I am, navigating the stormy waters of family dynamics. It all started when my son's ex-girlfriend announced her pregnancy. The news hit him hard, and I could see the pain etched on his face. He felt abandoned, claiming she never bothered to check on how he was coping. After spending time with his friends, he came home visibly upset, saying he might not be around much anymore. He expressed a hope that I would still hang out with him, which tugged at my heartstrings. One of my son's friend's fathers, who is a counselor, reached out to me. He shared that he had been in touch with my son and believed him. He warned me that if we weren't careful, we might lose him. That struck a chord with me. I knew I had to take a stand. I told my wife that if she mentioned the baby without a paternity test being done, our relationship would be over. I meant it. I love her, but my son's well-being had to come first. He was acting out, and I was genuinely worried about his mental state. Fast forward a month, and my wife and I had separated, but thankfully, we were on good terms. I moved into a flat with my son, and I could see a change in him. He seemed happier. The good news was that my son's ex-girlfriend's parents had agreed to a paternity test, which was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I couldn't help but wonder what had prompted this sudden change, but I was relieved nonetheless. When I shared the news about the paternity test with my son, he surprised me by asking to meet his ex and her parents to apologize for his earlier comments. It was a mature move on his part, and they graciously accepted his apology. However, he made it clear to his ex that he wasn't starting anything with her, and he firmly believed the baby wasn't his. She, on the other hand, insisted it was. I suggested he might want to have a conversation with his mother, but he was adamant that he wouldn't apologize to her, nor would he forgive her, even if she apologized to him. The rift between them was deep, and it hurt to see my son so angry. Whenever she visited our flat, he would leave. It was clear that their relationship was strained, and I felt helpless. One evening, I reassured my son that I wouldn't be angry if he had been lying about the situation, but I preferred honesty over finding out through the test. He reiterated that he believed the baby wasn't his. He mentioned that he couldn't keep up with girls and used protection, but not with boys. I was taken aback, but reminded him that I would support him no matter what. As we navigated this new territory, I made sure he had access to counseling, even though there was a long waiting list. In the meantime, I connected him with a helpline staffed by student psychologists. It wasn't therapy, but it provided him with someone to talk to. I wanted him to feel supported as he figured things out. Throughout this ordeal, I remained focused on being there for my son. His well-being was my priority, and I was determined to help him through this challenging time. I knew that whatever he identified as, I would stand by him. The world was already complicated enough without adding labels, and I respected his wish to keep things quiet. As I reflect on everything that has happened, I realize that family dynamics can be incredibly complex. I never expected to be in this position, but I am committed to supporting my son as he navigates his feelings and the challenges ahead. It's a journey, and while it's filled with uncertainty, I know that love and understanding will guide us through. Life can throw some pretty unexpected curveballs, and I found myself facing one of those moments when my son, who is just 16, revealed that his ex-girlfriend was pregnant. As a father, I thought I was prepared for anything, but this news shook me to my core. Initially, my son insisted that he wasn't the father, and I believed him. He had always been a bit of a wild child, but I thought he was just going through a rough patch. He had been facing some bullying at school, and I could see how it affected him. He felt that his mother, my wife, wasn't supportive during this tough time, which only added to the tension between them. I knew that their relationship had its ups and downs, but I never imagined it would come to this. My wife, on the other hand, was convinced that our son was lying. She was already planning for her grandchild, blissfully unaware of the complexities surrounding the situation. I felt stuck in the middle, wanting to support my son while also trying to maintain peace in my marriage. I love my wife dearly. She is my best friend, and I hated to see her in pain. But I also recognized that my son needed me to stand by him during this tumultuous time. As we navigated this complicated family dynamic, I couldn't help but reflect on my own feelings. Yes, our son was a surprise, and while I was scared when I first became a father, I never felt trapped. I understood that my wife might be projecting her own fears onto our son, especially since carrying a child can be an overwhelming experience. My goal was to mend the relationship between my son and my wife, hoping they could find common ground. Then, things took a turn. After spending a significant amount of money on a paternity test, my son decided he needed a break. He and his ex-girlfriend disappeared for a few days, and I was left in a state of panic trying to reach him. When he finally video called me, I was shocked to hear him say that he had lied about everything. He admitted that the test would likely show he was the father, and they wanted to talk things through without any adults involved. In that moment, I felt a mix of anger and disappointment. I had stood by my son, believing he was telling the truth, only to find out that he had deceived us all. My wife, surprisingly, took the news with grace. She suggested that perhaps giving them space to talk might be a good idea, even if I wasn't entirely convinced. As I reflected on the situation, I realized that my son had caused a lot of turmoil in our lives. While I would always love him, I was struggling to like him at that moment. I had to confront the reality that I had let him get away with too much, believing he was just a scared teenager. I reached out to my wife and apologized for not supporting her more during this ordeal. She was far more understanding than I deserved, and I knew I had to make amends. The paternity test results were expected soon, but I was bracing myself for whatever news would come. In the end, I learned that parenting is not just about supporting your children, it's also about holding them accountable. As we awaited the results, I hoped for the best, but prepared for the worst, knowing that our family would need to come together, no matter the outcome. I never imagined I would find myself in the middle of such a complicated family situation. It all started when my son's ex-girlfriend announced that she was pregnant. The news hit us like a ton of bricks. I knew my son had been in a relationship with her, but I never thought it would lead to this. My instinct was to support my son, and I felt it was important to stand by him during this turbulent time. After hearing the news, I reached out to his ex-girlfriend to express my apologies for the chaos that had unfolded. Surprisingly, she responded with maturity, acknowledging that I was being loyal to my son. It was a strange moment of clarity amidst the confusion. My son and his ex were trying to figure out their next steps, discussing how they would manage the situation together. They even mentioned they might have her location, which raised some red flags for me. As the days passed, I learned that my son had spoken to both his ex and her parents. He apologized once again, expressing his desire to make things right. However, I was skeptical about their intentions. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My son was adamant that he wanted to support her, but I was worried about the implications of their relationship. Then, everything took a turn. One evening, my son returned home after spending time with friends, and he had a confrontation with his mother. I was at work, but I could sense the tension building. Later that week, I received a series of messages that left me feeling drained. My son had come out on social media, revealing that he was in a relationship with his ex-girlfriend again. It was a confusing twist in an already complicated narrative. The situation escalated when her parents received the DNA results regarding the pregnancy. They had agreed not to open the email without us, but when they did, it turned out my son was not the father. This revelation sent shockwaves through our family. My son, in a moment of anger, expressed his feelings about his mother, claiming that she didn't care about him and would have cheered if something drastic had happened to him. It was heartbreaking to hear him say that. As the dust settled, my son and his ex-girlfriend were seen together again, cuddled up on the couch. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. I spoke to him privately, trying to understand his perspective. He insisted that he hadn't been intimate with her and that the decision for her to terminate the pregnancy was made without his involvement. It was a lot to process, and I felt utterly drained by the emotional turmoil. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel sympathy for his ex-girlfriend. I had known her for a year and a half, and she had been a part of our family gatherings. It was difficult to reconcile the good memories with the chaos that had unfolded. I understood that she had made mistakes, but I also recognized that she was still a young person trying to navigate a challenging situation. My wife was understandably upset when she heard the news about the DNA test. She cried, realizing the extent of the emotional damage that had been done. My son had shut her out, refusing to communicate with her. It was painful to witness the rift growing between them. I loved my wife deeply, and I hoped we could find a way to heal as a family. As I reflected on the events, I realized that my son was struggling with feelings of betrayal and anger. He felt bullied at school and on social media, and he believed his mother had sided with those who turned against him. It was a heavy burden for a young person to carry. I knew he needed counseling to help him process his emotions and find healthier ways to cope. In the midst of all this chaos, I couldn't help but see the good in my son. He had chosen to support his ex-girlfriend, even at the cost of his own well-being. It was a testament to his character, even if it was clouded by confusion and hurt. I hoped that, in time, he would find peace and clarity. As I prepared for a much-needed vacation to escape the turmoil, I couldn't shake the feeling that our family would eventually find a way to heal. It would take time, patience, and understanding, but I believed we could emerge stronger from this experience. Life is complicated, and sometimes it takes a storm to reveal the strength of our bonds. I never imagined I would find myself in the middle of such a complicated family situation. It all started when my son, who had been dating a girl for a while, found himself in a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. The news of his ex-girlfriend's pregnancy hit us like a ton of bricks, and the fallout from that revelation was far more complicated than I could have anticipated. Initially, my son and his ex-girlfriend had a close relationship, one that I thought was built on trust and mutual respect. However, things took a turn when she revealed her pregnancy. My son was understandably shaken, and I could see the conflict brewing between him and his ex. They had been through a lot together, but this was a whole new level of stress for both of them. As the situation unfolded, my wife and I found ourselves on opposite sides of the debate. She was sympathetic to the ex-girlfriend's plight, while I felt it was essential to support our son in this challenging time. I believed he needed to take responsibility for his actions, and I didn't want to undermine that by siding with his ex. This led to some tense conversations at home, and soon, we were both feeling the strain. My wife was particularly affected by the emotional turmoil. She had a close bond with our son, and seeing him in distress was heartbreaking for her. I understood her feelings, but I also felt that it was crucial for our son to navigate this situation on his own terms. I wanted him to learn from this experience, to grow and mature as he faced the consequences of his actions. As the days passed, the drama only intensified. My son confided in me about the details surrounding the pregnancy and the decisions that were made. He mentioned that his ex-girlfriend had sought an abortion, and while I was relieved that they were taking a step to manage the situation, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. He expressed his concerns about the procedure and the emotional toll it was taking on both of them. In the midst of all this, my son's relationship with his ex began to unravel. There were accusations and misunderstandings that only added fuel to the fire. It became clear that the trust they once had was now in jeopardy. I felt like I was caught in the middle, trying to mediate between my wife's compassion for the ex-girlfriend and my son's need for support. Despite the chaos, I tried to remain a steady presence for my son. I encouraged him to communicate openly with his ex and to take responsibility for his part in the situation. I knew that this was a pivotal moment for him, one that would shape his character and his future relationships. However, I also worried about the toll it was taking on my wife, who was struggling to cope with the emotional fallout. As we navigated this tumultuous period, I found myself reflecting on the dynamics of our family. My wife and I had always been a team, but this situation was testing our bond. I wanted to be there for my son, but I also needed to support my wife. It was a delicate balance, and I often felt like I was walking a tightrope. In the end, I realized that no one was truly at fault in this situation. My son was young and still learning about the complexities of relationships, while his ex-girlfriend was facing her own challenges. My wife and I were simply trying to do our best as parents, even if our approaches differed. As we moved forward, I hoped that my son would come out of this experience wiser and more resilient. And while my wife and I might not have seen eye to eye on everything, I knew that our love for our son would ultimately guide us through this difficult time. It was a lesson in family, compassion, and the importance of communication, and I hope that we would all emerge stronger on the other side.